Okay, so we all know that online civility in politics is, well, a huge deal, right? We talk all the time about protecting politicians from online abuse. But today, we're going to flip that script. We're looking at a really interesting case where the whole power dynamic gets turned on its head. I mean, we pretty much expect politicians to be the ones taking the heat online, right? They're the targets. But what happens when they're the ones dishing it out? What if they're the ones crossing that line? Now, that's question, it really gets to the heart of what power and accountability are all about. And that's exactly what brings us to Shoalhaven, a community down in New South Wales, Australia. You see, the usual story we hear, from the UK and other places is that people are abusing politicians online. But in Shoalhaven, it's this strange paradox. The story here is that some of the worst behavior has allegedly come from the leaders, aimed squarely at the citizens they're supposed to represent.
So you gotta be asking, how did things get this bad? Well, to really get it, we need to dive into the story of a council under some serious scrutiny and what's being described as a system that's basically falling apart.
And right at the heart of this whole mess, one big contentious decision, appointing a new CEO for the council. Now, this wasn't just some random candidate. Nope. He was a former state minister and, more importantly, a longtime publicly known political ally of the mayor. And the way this whole thing went down, wow, it's like a textbook example of how not to do things. It basically happened in 3 steps. First, the mayor herself is chairing the recruitment panel. Okay. Second, she declares a conflict of interest, but calls it non-significant. And third, she uses her special casting vote to break a tie and get her guy the job. Unbelievable. So let's talk about that non-significant conflict of interest for a second. We're talking about a public, acknowledged personal and political relationship between the mayor and the new CEO that goes back more than 20 years. 20 years. So yeah, you can see why a lot of residents were thinking, this doesn't exactly feel impartial. So what did the residents do? They started a petition calling for something called a censure motion. Now, it's really important to get what this is. It's not about getting someone fired. A censure motion is basically a formal slap on the wrist. It's the council officially going on the record to say, we strongly disapprove of this conduct. This isn't okay. But look, this whole CEO appointment thing, it wasn't just a one-off problem. It was really just the tip of the iceberg. We're talking about a whole pattern of dysfunction here. You've got broken promises on the basic stuff, roads, rates, and rubbish. You've got a string of people resigning, both staff and counselors, with one even calling the workplace culture toxic. And get this, 2 official orders from SafeWork for psychosocial risks. That's serious. So these aren't just a bunch of random, separate problems. No, what this is all pointing to is something much deeper. It's a root cause, a culture of defensiveness coming right from the top. Man, there is a quote that just perfectly captures this attitude. It says, counselors and executives often behave as if they're living in a fortress from the 1950s surrounded by citizens who must be managed or kept in line. A fortress mentality, right? Where the public isn't someone you serve, but someone you have to control.
In this kind of culture, it has real consequences. For example, you have leaders openly calling residents who ask questions keyboard warriors. Or, and this one's wild, they apparently twist privacy laws to shut down scrutiny, telling people they can't discuss public documents when the law is actually meant to hold the council accountable, not gag the public. And if you want to see how deep this Team Jersey kind of thinking goes, there's this little story that makes it all so clear. It all started with just a simple chat in a local shop in a town called. So the person writing the story asks a longtime supporter of the mayor about the really obvious conflict of interest with the CEO job. And the supporter's response was just, I don't care. That's it. I don't care. And that right there is the Team Jersey mentality. Loyalty to your team is more important than the rules, than ethics, than anything. Okay, so when you're up against this kind of fortress, what can you as a citizen even do? Well, this is where we get to the Citizen Accountability Toolkit. It's about how residents fought back, not with protests, but by using the system's own rules against it. And the most powerful tool they have is something called the. Basically, it's a law in New South Wales that says citizens have a legal right to get government information. The whole idea behind it is that transparency is supposed to be the default setting. Secrecy is the exception, and they have to justify it. So using tools like this, one citizen in particular was super methodical.
He'd put in Jeeper requests to get documents, he'd file official complaints, he questioned every decision, but always through the proper channels. This isn't being a troublemaker. This is what being an engaged citizen looks like. And how did the council react to this? Well, instead of dealing with the actual issues he was raising, they basically circled the wagons. They officially labeled him a difficult correspondent. They assigned him a special case manager to bottleneck all communication. They stopped taking his calls and put heavy restrictions on his emails. They used bureaucracy as a shield. And this, right here, gets to the absolute core of the whole civility problem. The argument is that people don't just become uncivil out of nowhere. It's what happens when they feel totally shut out, when the system is a black box, and when asking legitimate questions gets you punished. So if you want people to be more civil, maybe, just maybe, you need better, more transparent government first. All right, so where does that leave us? If this whole culture of control is the disease, then the only cure, really, is a serious dose of transparency. Because at the end of the day, the big argument here isn't that we need to blame social media or create more rules to shut people up online. No. The argument is that the buck stops with the leaders. They have to be the ones to model the behavior they expect from everyone else. It's on them to act with integrity and respect. And this final thought really just says it all. When leaders misstate the law, mock the public, and then call for civility, they're not protecting democracy. They're eroding it. It just perfectly captures that hypocrisy, right? Demanding respect from the public while doing things that destroy any basis for it, that's not just bad leadership, it's actively damaging democracy. So we're left with this big question, not just for Shoalhaven, but for all of us. This might be a local story, but the issues, they're universal. It really makes you stop and think, what does it actually take to keep our own local democracy healthy? And maybe the answer isn't about silencing the critics. Maybe it starts with making sure the people in power are actually worthy of our trust in the first place.